Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live session, Science, the Way, the Life, and the Truth, ? Today what we're going to be covering, inshallah, is science the main root of knowledge? Is science something that gives us certainty? Does science actually lead to atheism? The first thing to note about this particular session is that there is a lot of information packed in a very short time. Now, what I want to do is I want to cover the basic concepts, and for a lot more detail, you can actually go and watch one of the videos online in which I cover this same topic in a lot more detail. So the first thing which is very important to understand is, why are we talking about this topic? Why are we talking about scientism? Why are we not talking about Taoism or Taoism or Buddhism or Confucianism or a different ism? So why are we talking about, firstly, what is the difference between science and scientism? Now, science is a beautiful method. It's a way of trying to discover knowledge about the world. It is a method which originated in the Muslim world with Hassan ibn Haytham 1,000 years ago. Before him, the Greeks had a type of proto-science where he came along and he showed us how to use science as a way of getting closer to God. Because he himself writes that one of his motivations for doing science is to become closer to God. So science is not atheistic in of itself, and it never was, and it never will be. Science started off in the Muslim world, and later on in the Christian world, in Western Europe, it flourished. And then later on, in the late Victorian era, more secularists and atheistic type people, they started getting involved in the sciences, and they became predominant in the sciences. So that's why there seems to be this affiliation between science and atheism. It's a very modern phenomena. It's not something which has been historically true. But anyway, what's the difference between science and scientism? So science is just a method, a harmless method to try and gain knowledge about the world, and a very beautiful method. Scientism is something very different. Scientism is not science. Scientism is the people who've made science into the way, the life, the truth. They've made science into the main root of knowledge. They believe science leads to atheism, and that science gives absolute results. It gives certainty in a world of confusion. The first thing to note is that science is not the only root of knowledge. It is not the only root of knowledge. Science is one root of knowledge amongst many others. Nowadays, science and rationality, they're both seen as synonymous. So if someone's doing something irrational, you would say, or someone would say, you're being unscientific. These are two different things. The way I want you to think about it is this. Imagine a large cloth, and a small part of that is science, and the large cloth itself is rationality. So rationality is the overall large source of knowledge, that's a root of knowledge that we actually have. Science is a subdomain of that. So there's many different ways of gaining knowledge other than science. We can gain knowledge through, obviously, logic. We can gain knowledge through introspection. We can gain knowledge through testimony. We can gain knowledge through mathematics. We can gain knowledge through many different other ways. So gaining knowledge has many different routes, and science is just one of them. So if someone restricts themselves and says, science is the only root of knowledge, essentially they are restricting their own worldview, and they will come up with absurdities, they will come up with incoherencies, they'll come up with major problems. So we're going to go over a few issues that happens when you say, look, I'm only going to believe in something if it's scientific. So here's the first thing. If someone says, I only believe in science, science is the main root of knowledge, we can simply ask them, do you believe 1 plus 1 is 2? They'll say yes. And then you can ask them, the belief that 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, this mathematical formula, is this based upon science or is this based upon maths? Now, any logical person will say, this is of course based upon mathematics, not science. So science needs mathematics. Science can never prove mathematics. A squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. This is known as Pythagoras' theorem. Pythagoras' theorem is not something that can be scientifically proven. It is what's known as an a priori piece of knowledge. It's something we know before experience, right? We actually know that regardless of how many triangles we go and measure in the world, a squared plus b squared is always going to be c squared. It's not going to be anything else. Okay, so we understand that science requires mathematics and you can't have it the other way around. You can't say, I'm only going to rely on science. Also logic. So whether you have fuzzy logic, you have inductive logic, deductive logic, abductive logic, whatever type of logical system you're following, you cannot prove that system by the scientific method. You simply have to assume it within science. So take a standard argument. Socrates is mortal. All mortals are made of cells. Therefore, Socrates is made of cells. So you have a premise, and a conclusion. Now, from the premises, the conclusion logically follows. Can this be proven using science? No, it can't. It's actually something we know through logic. So science, so far, we've seen it needs mathematics. It also needs logic. So to say science is the only root of knowledge would be problematic straight off the bat. Okay, let's look at a few other examples. Someone says, I believe in Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was a real historical figure. And if you go around asking about Genghis Khan, it's a very widespread belief in the world that Genghis Khan did actually exist. A very rational belief. However, consider this. Is the belief in Genghis Khan a belief that's based upon science or based upon the testimony of other people, historical information? It's actually not based upon science at all. If someone wanted to go do a DNA test about Genghis Khan, well, we don't know where his grave is. And even if you could find a grave, how do you know that that's his grave and not somebody else's grave? It may say Genghis Khan, but you're just taking that upon testimony. Now, if you're doing a DNA test and you see, okay, this was an ancient man who lived in Mongolia, that still doesn't mean at all that that person is actually Genghis Khan. So all of your belief about Genghis Khan is essentially based upon the idea of testimony. That's all that you actually have. You don't have anything beyond testimony. Let's do another thought experiment. Right now you're probably watching this on your phone or your laptop or something like this. So I want you to consider something, right? I want you to consider, okay, so imagine you take out your phone and you put in Micronesia as a country. So you look for this country, Micronesia. You may never have heard of this country before, but as you Google it, you'll see people may have traveled to Micronesia, there may be blogs about it, there may be pictures, there may be all this information. You can also check it out on Google Maps. Now that you have looked for yourself whether this country exists or not, is that knowledge that Micronesia is a real country based upon you looking at the images on Google? Is that scientific knowledge? Is that empirical knowledge? Or is that actually testimonial knowledge? That's actually a very interesting question. And the reason for that is that actually it is testimonial knowledge. It's not purely scientific knowledge. It can't be, because you are accepting that those pictures are actually of Micronesia. They could be of the Java Islands or of something completely different. Okay, so why is testimony very important in terms of a source of knowledge? Firstly, philosophers recognize that testimony is a valid source of knowledge. Secondly, testimony accounts for the lion's share of human rational beliefs. So if I was to split open your brain and take out all of the beliefs and download them onto a hard drive and measure how many of those beliefs are based upon science and how many beliefs are based upon testimony, the vast majority, more than 99%, are going to be based upon testimony. Interestingly, this is also true for a scientist. Say there is a biologist who is working within the field of genetics, and they're working on some theory to do with kin selection or whatever. They will understand and accept the Big Bang Theory, which is a theory in cosmology. They themselves would not have done any of the experiments to understand that the Big Bang is a valid theory model paradigm. However, they would accept it to be true because of testimony, not because they've done the experiment. So a geneticist who's working within his subfield, he will have to accept all of the knowledge that is acquired by the scientists in the past and the scientists who are alive today, and all the scientific journals, even though he or she have not done those actual tests. They've simply accepted that based upon testimony. So far, what do we have? We have the idea that logic, mathematics, testimony are valid sources of knowledge, and you cannot actually discount them at all. And this is a very powerful argument against those people who say science is the main root of knowledge. Let's try out another thought experiment. Say you see a child that is hungry and starving and cold, and you see the child in the street and it's shivering. Somebody goes up to the child, they hug the child, they feed the child, they clothe the child, they show the child some love. You will look at that and you will say, that is a good action. I respect that. That is good. Conversely, imagine if an evil person goes up to the same child who is cold and poor and starving and starts hitting that child, starts beating that child mercilessly for no reason. You would definitely try and stop that, and you would say that that is evil, that is brutal, that is barbaric. However, from a purely scientific perspective, if we want to be proponents of scientism, there is no difference between the two scenarios, between the child being helped and the child being attacked. They're both particles in motion. There is no objective right and wrong. As Richard Dawkins explains in his works, there is no good, there is no evil, there is no design, there is nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. So good and bad do not actually exist in the world. These are pure social constructs where they're biological in origin and they're shaped by culture. So you cannot, if you want to follow scientism, be somebody who says, I believe in right and wrong, because right and wrong goes out the window. What's powerful about right and wrong is that right and wrong are the driving forces of human behavior. Human behavior, to a large extent, is driven by moral issues. Look at the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, the American Civil War, the rights movement, the civil rights movement in America. All of these movements across the world, these are what in nature? These are moral in nature. So if someone says, I only believe in science and I don't believe in anything unless it's scientific, you really have to reject morals, which is scary. if you think about it, because what else do we have except morality? Morality is the driving force of human behavior. Morality is for us Muslims, is fitri, is natural. We recognize there is a creator, and we recognize there are rights that other people actually have. Now think about the concept of love. Now we're on to emotions. So we spoke about morality, now we're on to emotions, right? So human beings are very emotional creatures. We have love, sympathy, empathy, fear, sadness, happiness, pleasure, all these types of emotions. Now, let's start off with the emotion of happiness. What is happiness? Happiness, from a purely scientific perspective, is a proximate mechanism to help you survive. What does that mean? What I mean by this is that happiness is not a goal. Happiness, like all other human emotions, from a cold reductionist scientific point of view, human emotions evolved to help us survive. So the emotion of happiness is no more intrinsically valuable than the emotion of sadness or anxiety. So a mother is taking care of a child, right? And she loves the child, clothes the child, takes selfies with the child, puts the child to sleep, wakes up in the night, does all these things for the child, just pours out her heart for the child in a way that fathers usually cannot even, they can only be, amazed at how mothers can do this. So from a cold scientific point of view, all you can say about a mother-child relationship is that the mother doesn't actually love the child in of itself. What it is that she was just blindly programmed by evolution to take care of the child, to love the child, because the child carries the mother's genes. That's basically it. So rock bottom, the mother only cares about her own selfish genes. She doesn't actually care about the child in of itself. Now, love, and of course this is nonsense, because mothers even love adopted children. Children that are adopted are loved by parents. So regardless whether, we can critique that later, but love is another intellectual victim of these people who say, we only believe in science. So morals goes out the window, and so do emotions. Love, hope, fear, all happiness, all these things are just proximate mechanisms. One's not better than the other, and they're just there to help you survive. Now, if that's not sad enough, let's get down to truth, right? Truth is another casualty when it comes to scientism. Now, if you ask us, someone who follows scientism, like, what is truth, right? Why do we value truth? A theist, someone who believes in God, can tell you, look, we value truth because God is the truth. God in Islam is called Al-Haq, the truth. And we believe truth should be followed, regardless whether you like it or you don't. But from a purely scientific, naturalistic point of view, a mechanical point of view, truth is instrumentally valuable. It is not intrinsically valuable in of itself. Truth is only as valuable as much as it can help you survive and reproduce, or what you actually desire to do in life. Other than that, it is not actually valuable. It is not intrinsically valuable. It is instrumentally valuable, which is kind of funny, because when you ask a proponent of scientism, why do you follow scientism? They're like, oh yeah, we follow scientism because it gives us truth. You can just ask them, well, why do you follow truth? Well, they're either going to say because, well, you can ask them, do you follow truth or falsehood? Why do you value truth over falsehood? So they're going to say, because truth is good. It's good to follow the truth. In that case, they're speaking about morals. And again, morals make no sense from a scientific perspective. Or they can say truth is valuable. But is it valuable in and of itself? No, it's not. It's only instrumentally valuable. So again, they just completely undermined their own worldview. Now, what do we have so far? Just to summarize. Those people who say we only believe in science, they don't understand that the vast majority of human knowledge is not scientific knowledge. And if they say we only want to believe in science, then they have to deny testimony, logic, mathematics, morals, emotions, truth. And here's the rub, right? Here's the really funny stuff. The statement, science is the only root of knowledge, that statement in of itself is not a scientific statement. That's a philosophical statement. You can't put that in a test tube. You can't test it out. It's a purely metaphysical proposition, right? It's something that you can't test. So the idea that science is the only root of knowledge is completely nonsensical. This idea of scientism is really crude and reductionist. It leaves us cold, intellectually hungry, in a dark place where there is no ultimate meaning, no ultimate hope, no ultimate purpose, no ultimate value, justice, hope, empathy, sympathy, anything like that. And that's crazy if you think about it, because isn't science supposed to be giving us meaning? And that's what we think gives us richness in life. But meaning is something which, from a purely scientific point of view, doesn't make sense. Because meaning is something which is not, you can't really reduce it, you can't really test it. So science cannot give you meaning. Science can only tell you the way, they can attempt to tell you the way the world actually works, not how the world should be. These are two different things. And if someone goes from this is the way the world is to this is the way the world should be, that's actually going from a supposed fact to a supposed value, which is known as the naturalistic fallacy. You can't go from this is the way that the world is to this is the way that the world should actually be. So where we are so far, we have decisively discovered that it is impossible for somebody to logically maintain that science is the only root of knowledge. That just doesn't make any sense. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, just in case you guys came in late, if you go into YouTube and you put in IERA, I-E-R-A, and science, and you go to their YouTube page, you'll find like a 2-something hour lecture in which I explain this in a lot more detail, inshallah, so you can go and watch that. Okay, so the second point is science the main, is science something that gives you certainty? Okay, so here's the thing. Science is a beautiful method, and its conclusions can always be revised. This is the standard understanding in the philosophy of science. No scientific theory is absolute in nature. If science gave us certainty, then we should be left with the scientific theories we had 400 years ago, and we wouldn't have changed them. But that's not what happens. As we get new data, as we get new interpretations, we have scientific changes, scientific revisions, and sometimes complete scientific paradigm shifts. Thomas Kuhn was a philosopher and a physicist, and he wrote a very interesting book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. In this book, he argues that the history of science is one of times in which scientists are working within a normal paradigm and everything's going well, and then science goes through these crisis periods, and then you get a complete new paradigm shift. So science changes, right? This is a standard understanding of the philosophy of science. Now, if you pick up any book on the philosophy of science, it's going to tell you something along the lines of using the word scientific proof is dangerous. Don't think conclusions are anything but tentative and proximate and provisional. They'll always change. They can always be revised. Why is this? Why is it the case that science always can revise itself? There's a few reasons for this. The first is known as the problem of induction. The second is known as the problem of underdetermination. The third is known as the problem of unconceived alternatives. And the fourth is known as theory-ladenness. So these are the four major problems why science can always revise its conclusions. Science can always change what it has actually confirmed for a long time, because that confirmation can be challenged by new data or new interpretations. So let me give you guys some quick examples. Now, obviously this is a very extremely summarized version of these things. So problem of induction is basically you go from the limited set of data to the general conclusion, right? And you can always get a new data set, a piece of data which can challenge your previous theory. Underdetermination is the same data can give rise to multiple interpretations. Problem of unconceived alternatives is that you may have the data in front of you, but there may be, and you've made 5, 6 different inferences, but there may be an inference, there may be a theory which is unconceived in your mind. And this is historically true when we look at the Newtonian and the Einsteinian revolution. Fourthly, it's the case that all theories suffer from theory-ladenness, that you're looking at a particular theory through a particular paradigm, and that paradigm dictates what is taken as important and what is not taken as important, and what is considered anomaly and what is considered a confirmation. So these are some of the major reasons why scientific conclusions can always change. Lastly, does science lead to atheism? No, it doesn't. If it did, then it should have been atheists who came up with science, the scientific method, who invented the scientific method. It was Hassan ibn Haytham, it wasn't atheists. Science doesn't lead to atheism. Science deals with how the world works. It's an attempt to explain how the world works, not why it exists. I can spend an hour explaining to you how the internet works, how you need electricity, you need satellites, you need algorithms, you need search engines. And after an hour of explaining to you how the internet works, I then tell you the internet made itself, no one made the internet. You'd be thinking that doesn't make any sense. No, someone obviously put this thing together. So how and why are two different things. And the Quran also makes this distinction between how and why. However, in the late Victorian era, when science became more atheistic because of some historical reasons, that's when the how and why became, blurred. And prior to that, scientists openly used to speak about God, but a rule was introduced in the late Victorian time which forced scientists not to be able to speak about God. This rule is known as methodological naturalism. Now, I cover a lot more of what I'm explaining right now on my channel, Darwinian Delusions, because this topic is extremely confusing sometimes for people. And the philosophy of science, what is it and how is it related to scientism and science and Darwinism? So I hope in this short crash course I have explained to you guys that science is not the main root of knowledge. Science does not give you certainty, and science does not lead to atheism at all. In fact, science is one root of knowledge amongst others. Science gives you provisional knowledge which can always change, and science, if anything, it cannot definitely not lead to atheism, but if anything, it can be used as a positive not argument for God, but from the Islamic perspective, science is a reminder of God, because our belief in God is based upon the fitrah, which is that belief in God is natural. So science is an aid, a conceptual tool to help us uncover the fitrah and feel closer to God. And because remember, the purpose of life in Islam is worship, worshipping Allah. That is the purpose of life. Worship is based upon three pillars: love, fear, and hope. Loving Allah, how can you love Allah when you do not truly understand Allah's greatness? Now, to understand Allah's greatness, you need to understand Allah's names and attributes, His power, and obviously Allah's word, the Quran, but also understanding Allah's nature, not just in books, but also understanding what Allah has created in nature. That is something which is considered worship, and it does bring us much closer to Allah. Everything good I have said is from Allah. Every mistake is from myself. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakallah khair for listening to this webinar. I am now, I think, going to be taking questions from the comment section. So if any of you, I can see that you have quite a few people online. However, what I'd really like is for you guys to just post a question and I will try and answer it, inshallah. Okay, so far I do not actually see any questions. What usually happens is, sadly, when you end these webinars, then somebody comes along and asks a question, and the person's gone by then. But since no one asked a question, I'm going to ask a question, which is, what's the point of gaining this knowledge? What's the point of gaining this knowledge where we learn about scientism? Shouldn't we just be trying to learn Quran or the Seerah, or, because time is precious. It's true. Learning the Quran, learning Seerah, learning other things, very important. However, what we need to understand is that Allah makes a promise in the Quran. Allah says in the Quran, هُوَ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولَهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى دِينِ كُلِّ وَكَفَى بِاللَّهِ شَهِيدًا. Allah says, it is He, Allah, who sent His messenger with guidance in the religion of truth, so that it may prevail over all religions, and enough is Allah as a witness. So what Allah is saying here is this. Allah is saying that He sent Islam and the Prophet so that the message may prevail over every deen, every system. So whether it's scientism, Darwinism, evolutionism, humanism, liberalism, Taoism, Christianity, feminism, whatever it is, Islam is going to intellectually challenge and dominate them all. Because Islam is the religion of fitrah. It is the religion which awakens what's the truth within. It is a revealed religion, but it is also a natural religion. We have the light of fitrah and we have the light of Allah. And when the lights meet, then you have light upon light. That's why we're studying scientism, because scientism is actually seen as a rival to Islam. And that's why we need to tackle it, because you can't tackle something that you don't actually understand. So I just answered my own question, but yeah, so any other questions, I'm happy to answer, but I can see that no one else has posted any questions. Okay, no problem. Thank you for attending this live session. I enjoyed it. I hope you guys did as well. And until next time, everything I have said that is of benefit, everything that is good is from Allah, and every mistake is from myself. Jazakallah khair for listening. Assalamu alaikum.